This tiny fraction of music led to possibly the greatest theft in music history. You might have heard it's because The Verve sampled it on Bitter Sweet Symphony, but they got permission, so that wasn't actually the theft. It's actually something much worse, almost ridiculous. The story begins back in 1965, when the Rolling Stones released their song, The Last Time.
Well, this could be the last time. This could be the...
Your first thought might be, this doesn't sound anything like Bitter Sweet Symphony. And that's because the sample doesn't come from this original, but instead from a cover version. In the mid-60s, the Rolling Stones were managed by Andrew Oldham. As a side project, Oldham would produce his own records under the name The Andrew Oldham Orchestra, including this record, The Rolling Stones Songbook. One of the songs featured on this record is a cover of The Last Time. 30 years later, in the mid-90s, Richard Ashcroft of The Verve discovered this relatively unknown record and decided to take a small sample from this song and write something completely new. He took this 4-bar loop and, along with the rest of the band, added dozens of instruments and wrote a completely new song based around this sample. Because they recorded so many more tracks and instruments, there's a lot more to the song than just the sample of The Last Time. Verve guitarist Nick McGabe explains, the sample hardly featured in it at all. The main string line that everybody seems to think is the sample is Will Malone's score. Hence, the high string line that comes in at the beginning and then the swelling strings have got nothing to do with the Rolling Stones. Nonetheless, they got permission to use the sample and agreed a 50-50 split in royalties with Decca Records, who own the recording. But just before the song was released, they had a problem. Alan Klein, another previous manager of the Rolling Stones who owned the songwriting copyright, filed a lawsuit claiming that the Verve had breached the agreement. Firstly, he claimed that the Verve had used more of the sample than they originally agreed, but also that the vocal melody was taken from the original Rolling Stones song, just at a slower tempo. Have a listen and see what you think.
Well, I've told you once and I've told you twice. It's a bitter sweet symphony that's life.
So just on the similarity of these two vocal melodies, the Verve was sued, claiming they stole the song from Mick Jagger and Keith Richards.
But there was never, I even knew that we may have the whole publishing taken away from us before we even put it on as a single. So it was in a no-win situation, and the song deserved to be heard at the end of the day. The song's bigger than me, bigger than the band.
Bitter Sweet Symphony was released in the summer of 1997 and soon became the Verve's biggest hit and one of the defining songs of the Britpop era, all whilst this lawsuit continued. But when Alan Klein saw how successful the song was, he no longer wanted the Verve to share the credit with Jagger and Richards, he instead wanted all of the credit. The case was settled out of court and Richard Ashcroft and The Verve were asked to hand over all songwriting credit and all royalties to Mick Jagger and Keith Richards. It was called one of the toughest deals in music history, and Ashcroft joked that Bitter Sweet Symphony was the best song Jagger and Richards have written in the past 20 years. The song was even nominated for a songwriting Grammy, and it was Jagger and Richards' name on the ballot, even though they played no role whatsoever in writing the song. Whilst it wasn't their fault what had happened, Mick Jagger and Keith Richards didn't get involved.
In the end, it's not in the Stones' hands, it's in the hand of some guy in a suit in New York City who owns their material. The Bitter Sweet Symphony, you're a slave to money, then you die. Then some geezer comes and takes all the publishing from it. It's sort of beautiful.
So it seemed like there was nothing anyone could do. Jagger and Richards couldn't hand over credit because they didn't actually own it, it was Klein's publishing company. Klein was notorious as this ruthless businessman, using the most aggressive tactics to protect the music rights that his company ABKCO managed. He managed a number of high-profile artists, but because of the many ugly disputes he'd be involved with, the artists he worked with often ended up distrusting or even resenting him.
When did you personally decide that Klein probably wasn't the man you thought he was?
Well, you're concluding that I thought he was something, you know. My position has always been the devil in the deep blue sea.
And it wasn't just Ashcroft and The Verve who were being screwed over. Andrew Oldham, who produced the cover version in the sample, sued Klein, claiming he was entitled to more money because of the song's use in advertising. And David Whittaker, who arranged the Oldham version, said the whole thing just makes me a bit sick. By 2019, it was estimated that Bitter Sweet Symphony had earned Jagger and Richards $5 million. Not because of the sample, or because of the similarity between these two vocal melodies. From a song which, by the way, the Rolling Stones adapted from another song. We came up with The Last Time, which was basically readapting a traditional gospel song that had been sung by the staple singers. But luckily, the song itself goes back into the mists of time. This is a great example of what is so typical in these music lawsuits. It's rarely one artist feeling that their work has been copied, it's the manager or people not involved in the creative process whatsoever. The most famous case in recent years has been Marvin Gaye versus Ed Sheeran, but this isn't an artistic case. Marvin Gaye isn't even alive anymore. It's people on his behalf trying to get as much money out of it as possible. And in this case, Jagger and Richards weren't the ones claiming the song was stolen. It was their manager from the 60s who owned the rights to the song. But Richard Ashcroft still refused to give up on winning this case.
I'm coming for that money. You know, someone stole like 50, God knows how much $1 million off me in 1997, and they still got it.
20 years later, things were about to change. After Alan Klein's passing in 2009, his publishing company was now in the hands of his son, Jody Klein. Jody agreed to speak with Mick Jagger and Keith Richards to see if they would hand over the songwriting credit, and in 2019 they finally agreed. The song is now entirely credited to Richard Ashcroft, as well as him receiving all future royalties. Unfortunately, none of the previous earnings would be returned, and of course, because streaming has completely reshaped the music industry, there's very little money to be made these days. And as Richard Ashcroft said, it was always about the song, not the money. I just wanted it to be mine again.